What happens when one of America's most polarizing political commentators sits down with television's most outspoken panel of hosts? Few could have predicted the chaos that followed. What began as a standard daytime talk show appearance quickly spiraled into ideological warfare, leaving producers scrambling and viewers stunned. This wasn't typical television drama. It was a striking example of how civil discourse can collapse when egos clash and tempers flare, ultimately ending with outrage and visible frustration. Before diving into this remarkable encounter, it's worth noting that what unfolded when Ben Shapiro faced the hosts of The View was anything but ordinary. The tension was unmistakable from the moment Ben Shapiro walked onto the set. Known for his rapid-fire delivery and uncompromising positions, the conservative commentator was there to promote his latest book and discuss the current political climate. What seemed like a routine appearance quickly became a combustible confrontation that left the studio audience gasping and social media buzzing. Shapiro took his seat as the panel Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, Sarah Haynes, Alyssa Farah Griffin, and Sunny Hostin exchanged knowing glances. It was clear this wouldn't be a soft interview. As Whoopi opened the discussion, longtime viewers sensed trouble brewing. She introduced Shapiro with a measured tone, but quickly pointed out that some of his recent comments about certain communities had sparked controversy. Shapiro leaned forward, unfazed. He thanked her for having him but questioned which comments she meant, suggesting that selective editing and lack of context often fueled outrage. That response ignited the panel. Joy Behar jumped in, accusing Shapiro of building a career on inflammatory rhetoric while hiding behind facts and logic. When challenged, Shapiro fired back, suggesting Joy relied on emotional attacks rather than substantive argument. The atmosphere grew tense as the audience murmured. Sarah Haynes attempted to steer the discussion toward common ground, bringing up free speech on college campuses. Shapiro dismissed the pivot, insisting that the panel's long-standing portrayal of conservative voices needed to be addressed head-on. He accused the show of promoting dishonest narratives and refused to play along for the sake of comfort. Sunny Hostin then entered forcefully, accusing Shapiro of attacking marginalized communities and spreading conspiracy theories under the guise of intellectualism. Shapiro shot back, referencing past political controversies and accusing the panel of framing dissent as victimhood politics. The exchange caused the discussion to erupt, with multiple hosts speaking at once. Whoopi intervened sharply, objecting to Shapiro dismissing concerns about foreign interference in U.S. politics. Shapiro doubled down, accusing the panel of moral grandstanding and manufactured outrage instead of factual debate. Joy Behar, visibly angry, lashed out, accusing Shapiro of arrogance and monetizing hatred. Shapiro responded calmly, saying he had come for dialogue but found only virtue signaling. Alyssa Farah Griffin attempted to restore order, urging everyone to lower the temperature, but the confrontation only intensified. Shapiro accused the panel of inviting him solely to ambush him for political points, calling the tactic cowardly and intellectually dishonest. The accusation hung in the air as Whoopi challenged his nerve, reminding him he had been given a platform. Shapiro laughed dismissively, calling the treatment ambush journalism rather than courtesy. The audience reacted loudly, divided between applause and boos, as producers struggled to regain control. Professional decorum gave way entirely when Sunny Hostin pressed Shapiro on past statements about transgender people and women in the workforce, labeling them bigoted talking points. Shapiro responded intensely, insisting his views had been misrepresented. He clarified that he had spoken about gender dysphoria as a psychological condition deserving compassion, not condemnation, and denied ever opposing women having careers. He argued instead for discussing data and outcomes, accusing the panel of rejecting nuance altogether. Joy Behar practically shrieked, accusing Shapiro of disguising harmful stereotypes as nuance and wrapping prejudice in pseudo-intellectual language. The confrontation spiraled rapidly out of control as voices rose and accusations flew. What began as a heated political disagreement had turned deeply personal and increasingly vicious. In the control room, producers frantically signaled for commercial breaks, but the hosts were far too engrossed in the battle to notice. Shapiro, instead of retreating, appeared to revel in the chaos he had ignited. His next remarks pushed the confrontation past the point of no return, setting the stage for an even more explosive escalation, one that left many questioning whether daytime television had finally crossed a line. Shapiro's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he delivered the blow he knew would land hardest. "You know what, ladies? "This is exactly why your show is losing viewers," he said. "You can't handle real intellectual discourse, so you resort to emotional manipulation and personal attacks. It's embarrassing to watch." The insult struck like lightning. Whoopi Goldberg's already fragile composure shattered completely. She fired back, furious, demanding to know who he thought he was to come on their show and insult them. Shapiro shot back without hesitation, declaring that he believed in facts over feelings, a concept he implied was foreign to the panel. He accused them of building careers on victimhood narratives and virtue signaling, claiming that the moment those narratives were challenged, they unraveled. Joy Behar was vibrating with rage. She accused Shapiro of fear-mongering and appealing to people's worst instincts while masquerading as an intellectual. Shapiro responded coolly, arguing that the real fear-mongering came from the panel itself. He accused them of spending years telling viewers that half the country hated them, that democracy was collapsing, and that anyone who disagreed was a Nazi, only to now lecture him about fear. By this point, the studio had descended into chaos. Shouting erupted among audience members on both sides, and security personnel edged closer to the set, prepared for the possibility that the verbal warfare might turn physical. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every explosive second of what was quickly becoming infamous television. Sunny Hostin abandoned all pretense of professionalism and leaned aggressively toward Shapiro, accusing him of providing intellectual cover for white supremacists and extremists. She dismissed his fast speech and polished rhetoric, calling him nothing more than a bigot with a platform. The accusation was so severe and personal that it seemed to drain the air from the room. Even Shapiro appeared momentarily stunned, but his response was swift and cutting. He called the accusation disgusting and said it revealed just how morally bankrupt the panel had become. He dismissed them as propagandists rather than journalists, and ineffective ones at that. Sarah Haynes, who had tried throughout to keep some order, finally snapped. She demanded to know how he dared to call them propagandists, insisting they had been doing the job longer than he had been relevant. She dismissed him as nothing more than a podcaster who got lucky. Shapiro laughed mockingly and responded that his podcast attracted more listeners in a week than the show drew viewers in a month. Instead of attacking him, he suggested they should reflect on why audiences were abandoning traditional media for alternative platforms. The remark hit hard. Declining viewership had been a sensitive issue, and Shapiro had weaponized it with precision. The hosts' faces reflected a mix of rage and humiliation. Desperate to regain control, Alyssa Farah Griffin urged everyone to stop the personal attacks and attempt a civilized discussion. Shapiro dismissed the appeal, arguing that civilized discussion required civilized participants. He pointed to the insults and accusations flying around the table and said civility had disappeared long ago. Joy Behar exploded once again, declaring that his ideas didn't deserve civility. She accused him of attacking women, minorities, and anyone who didn't fit his narrow worldview, arguing that such behavior forfeited any claim to respectful discourse. "There it is," Shapiro replied with satisfaction. He accused the panel of revealing their true beliefs, that they didn't support free speech, dialogue, or democracy, but instead believed anyone who disagreed with their ideology should be silenced and ostracized. He thanked them for proving his point so completely. The accusation of anti-democratic sentiment proved to be the final straw for Whoopi Goldberg. She rose abruptly from her chair, fists clenched, her entire body shaking with rage. She lashed out, accusing Shapiro of spewing hate-filled rhetoric and then having the audacity to lecture others about democracy. Shapiro stood as well, matching her intensity. He fired back that the only hatred on display was coming from the panel itself, accusing them of resorting to name-calling and personal attacks whenever they were challenged. The exchange sent the studio into full pandemonium. Audience members jumped to their feet, shouting at one another, while production assistants scrambled across the stage in a desperate attempt to restore order. Cameras captured every second, the raw, unfiltered collapse of what was meant to be a civil daytime talk show. Sunny Hostin, her voice trembling with emotion, made one final attempt to land a devastating blow. She accused Shapiro of building his career by bullying teenagers and attacking people who couldn't fight back, calling him a coward hiding behind a microphone. The personal nature of the attack appeared to genuinely affect him, and for the first time, his composure cracked. "A coward," Shapiro shot back. He pointed out that he was sitting alone facing 5 hostile hosts, taking their strongest attacks without backing down. He accused them of cowardice instead, claiming they had invited him on only to gang up on him because they couldn't win a fair fight. Joy Behar, now completely unrestrained, rejected the idea of fairness altogether. She argued that there was nothing fair about giving a platform to someone she accused of spreading lies and division for profit. She labeled Shapiro a cancer on political discourse and mocked his career, dismissing him as a failed entertainer who found a second act in political hysteria. Shapiro responded immediately, accusing Joy of pretending to be a journalist while peddling partisan talking points and conspiracy theories. His remark about her comedy background struck a deeply personal nerve. Her reaction was swift and venomous, but before she could finish, Whoopi Goldberg exploded with a fury that stunned the entire studio. What followed would be talked about for years. The confrontation reached its absolute breaking point when Whoopi thundered for silence, her voice booming across the set. Trembling with anger, she pointed directly at Shapiro and unleashed a blistering condemnation, accusing him of arrogance, condescension, and profound disrespect. She demanded to know how he dared come onto their show and insult them in their own space. For a brief moment, the studio fell into stunned silence before Shapiro responded with equal venom. He rejected the idea that the show was anyone's house, insisting it was supposed to be a place for discussion, not a protected bubble for fragile egos. He accused the panel of living in an echo chamber where any dissenting voice was treated as an attack. Sunny Hostin shot back instantly, springing from her chair and accusing Shapiro of being unable to handle criticism without resorting to insults. She dismissed him as nothing more than a playground bully armed with a thesaurus. The jab struck hard. His composure, already strained, began to visibly crack. Shapiro fired back, calling the accusation hypocritical and pointing out that the panel routinely ganged up on conservative guests. He claimed at least he had the courage to face opposition directly rather than hiding behind groupthink. Joy Behar, having built toward this moment throughout the segment, finally reached her breaking point. She mocked Shapiro's claims of courage, accusing him of attacking defenseless people from the safety of a studio and spreading lies and hatred for money. She branded him a coward and a fraud. Shapiro's voice wavered slightly as genuine anger broke through his controlled demeanor. He accused Joy of pretending to be a journalist when she was, in his view, a partisan figure who had failed in comedy. He claimed at least he was honest about his biases. That final remark, aimed squarely at her past, was the cruelest blow yet. Joy's reaction was immediate, explosive, and deeply personal as the segment teetered on the brink of total collapse. "How dare you come for my career?" Joy snapped, accusing Shapiro of being nothing more than a privileged figure who had bought his way into relevance. The accusation ignited him instantly. Shapiro's voice shot up as he rejected the claim outright, insisting he had built his career from the ground up while accusing Joy of coasting on mediocrity and ideological loyalty for decades. He dismissed her attack as class warfare used when merit failed. Sarah Haynes, who had spent the entire segment attempting to play peacemaker, finally lost her patience. She called the situation insane and urged both sides to stop behaving like children throwing tantrums on national television. Her intervention only poured fuel on the fire. Shapiro turned on her with sharp precision, arguing that adults don't invite guests onto their show just to ambush them, and they don't gang up 5-on-1 because they can't handle a fair debate. He dismissed the entire panel as a joke. Alyssa Farah Griffin stood up, abandoning her professional restraint. She accused Shapiro of humiliating himself, pointing out how enraged he looked and claiming he couldn't handle being challenged. That accusation proved to be the breaking point. Shapiro's face flushed, his hands shook, and his delivery became frantic as he rejected the notion that this was a challenge at all. He called it harassment and accused the panel of compensating for intellectual weakness with volume and personal attacks. The insult shattered what little stability remained in the studio. The audience erupted, some cheering, others booing, many shouting over one another. Security guards moved closer to the stage, clearly preparing for the situation to escalate further. Whoopi Goldberg, her authority as moderator completely eroded, made one final attempt to take control. She declared the interview over and ordered Shapiro to leave the studio. Shapiro laughed harshly. The sound tinged with desperation. He reminded her that it was network television, not a personal kingdom, and said he had no desire to stay anyway. He labeled the exchange the most intellectually dishonest conversation he had ever experienced. Sonny Hostin responded with pure venom, accusing Shapiro of pretending to be a serious thinker when he was, in her words, nothing more than a shock jock in a suit. At that point, Shapiro completely unraveled. His usual composure vanished, replaced by raw fury. He accused the panel of turning political discourse into reality television and building careers on manufactured outrage and division. Sensing an opening, Joy Behar delivered what she intended to be the final, devastating blow. She accused Shapiro of building his career on tragedy and grief. The accusation was so severe that it appeared to physically stagger him. His face went pale, and for a moment he struggled to speak. When he finally found his voice, it was low and shaking with anger. He demanded to know how she dared make such a claim, accusing her of knowing nothing about his life or beliefs. He lashed out, calling her bitter and talentless, and condemned what he saw as a career rooted in hatred. The studio descended into total chaos. Producers shouted into headsets, security moved decisively toward the stage, and the audience stood screaming at one another as cameras captured every second of the meltdown, an unfiltered collapse of civil discourse on national television. Still, Shapiro wasn't finished. Rising slowly from his chair, he turned directly to the camera and delivered what would become the most quoted line of the entire confrontation. He framed the scene as a reflection of modern journalism, accusing the panel of resorting to character attacks because they lacked substantive arguments. He claimed this was precisely why alternative media was overtaking traditional outlets, because it was willing to host honest conversations rather than partisan theater. The direct address sent the hosts into an immediate uproar. Whoopi screamed for security, demanding that Shapiro be removed from the studio. Shapiro shot back that personal insults were their final argument and thanked them for proving his point about what he called the show's intellectual bankruptcy. Security finally reached the stage, but Shapiro raised his hands and indicated he would leave voluntarily. As he unclipped his microphone, he delivered one final parting shot, saying the experience had been educational, not for the reasons intended. He said he had hoped for a real conversation, but instead received a master class in how not to conduct an interview, promising to use the incident as an example of media bias in the future. With that, Shapiro turned and walked off the set, leaving behind a panel still shouting after him. The audience remained in turmoil as the production crew scrambled to cut to commercial. What was meant to be a routine promotional appearance had transformed into one of the most explosive moments in daytime television history. As the cameras captured the aftermath, the hosts appeared stunned by the intensity of what had just unfolded. The audience continued arguing among themselves, and the studio felt like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. The confrontation would be replayed, analyzed, and debated for months, marking a moment when the facade of civility finally collapsed and millions of viewers watched it happen in real time.